Hello, and thank you so much for joining me. Today I'll be presenting Healing a Damaged Gut that was presented at the Gluten-Free Expo in Toronto, Ontario. My name is Josh Gitalis. I am a clinical nutritionist and functional medicine specialist. I have a practice in Toronto, Ontario, where I see people one-on-one. I also consult with people all over the world. I also provide professional level courses to various healthcare practitioners on topics such as clinical detoxification, therapeutic nutrition and supplements in practice, as well as applied nutrition in clinical practice and many other topics. Very excited to be with you today to present on this topic, as digestion is where everything begins and everything ends. So the health of our digestive tract is important and critical for the health of the whole body. So let's begin. First, I want to just outline a few points on what you will actually learn. First of all, why gluten is the villain. We see gluten everywhere in the news these days, and some people claim that it's just a fad, and some people say that no, it's really an important thing for us to possibly eliminate and be aware of in the diet. So we'll explore whether that's true or untrue, and you might guess where we're going to be going with that just based on the title of this talk. Then we'll dive into the 4 pillars of healing, and when I refer to the 4 pillars, I'm talking about using diet, therapeutic foods, supplements, and lifestyle to bring the body back into balance. And when we use each one of those, we truly get a holistic effect on the body and can influence healing quite effectively. So I hope that by the end of this talk you walk away with some really valuable tools that you can apply right away. Let's look at some facts before we get into the meat of this lecture. Firstly, symptoms precede celiac diagnosis by 11 years. And this is very interesting because people begin to feel digestive issues, and not just digestive issues, but issues systemically, as we'll see in a moment, years before there's a diagnosis. And currently, the standard of care is a doctor needs to see complete villus atrophy in order to properly diagnose celiac disease. And what we'll see in a moment is that that is a diagnostic with some limitations. So people are suffering with the disease many years before they actually see a doctor that's going to diagnose them and give them a name. Celiac disease doubles every 15 years. Now, humans have been on the planet for 2.6 million years, and our genetic makeup hasn't really changed too much over that period of time. In fact, there's some estimates that it takes about 10,000 years for our genes to change 0.01%. So we can see that a doubling every 15 years over the past 60 years or so is quite dramatic for this disease. So something has changed in our environment, or is changing in our environment, that is resulting in this disease appearing in many more people. Because our gene hasn't changed. So we are still the same humans we were thousands and thousands of years ago. So what is the actual cause of those changes over time? And you'll see that it could be many causes. It could be chemicals, it could be stress, it could be heavy metals, it could be even food allergies and dysfunction of the immune system. But this is definitely becoming more prevalent in our society. 50% of adult onset celiacs lack gastrointestinal symptoms. So as I mentioned before, people don't necessarily have to have digestive issues in order to have a manifestation of the disease called celiac. And as you can see here, this in the picture in the slide is the functional unit of our small intestine. It's called a microvilli. And these are our absorptive cells. And these cells are critical for taking what we eat from our food, breaking it down, and then absorbing it across this very thin membrane, which is actually 1 cell thick. So actually what we're looking at here is a complete villi, and it's made up of many different microvilli. The one on your left is in good health, and you can see there's no damage. And the one on the right, the tip has been damaged. You can sort of think of a shag carpet and, cutting the top of that shag carpet, and that's exactly what happens to the small intestine. Now, what's interesting is that in 1950, we had the introduction of the small bowel biopsy. So that allowed us to stick a scope down into the digestive tract and actually take a sample of that digestive tract, specifically the small intestine, to see what was going on with these people with symptoms. And what they found was these people with severe digestive symptoms who were celiac had this atrophy of the villi, which we're looking at here. So that kind of set us on a path of using that as a diagnostic tool for celiac. But what we now know is that 50% of people don't even have digestive issues. So we have to be aware that this condition might exist in almost everybody. Now, why has wheat become, and gluten specifically, become such a villain? Now, when we're referring to gluten, we're referring to a protein component contained in a number of grasses or grains. We're talking about wheat, rye, barley, kamut, and spelt, which all contain the gluten component. But really, wheat has the most gluten and has, the most cause for reaction in many people. So a little bit of the history on wheat is that our wheat is not the same wheat today as it was many, many, many years ago. And as we farmed wheat, we've basically made it into a form that, one, is a lot more tasty, so contains more gluten, and two, is much easier to harvest. So our original wheat was called the einkorn wheat, and it actually had 14 chromosomes. And you can see it here on the left-hand side of the picture. It was a much taller grass than our much different wheat today, which is called dwarf wheat, and it has 42 chromosomes. And the reason why we did this is because it's a lot easier to harvest this dwarf wheat, which is much shorter, and it's a lot less prone to being destroyed by things like wind and other factors in the environment. So although it has afforded us more yields from our farmland, it has taken away the health benefits of this basically food. Now you can think about your immune system as this system that kind of protects you and makes sure you're not, having foreign substances into your body. For example, if a virus or a bacteria comes into your body, your immune system looks at the proteins on the surfaces of those cells or in those cells and identifies it as not you and attacks it. And then you get over your infection and you're fine. But when we eat foods that our immune system doesn't recognize, that has a completely different genetic makeup, as we see here, it also can actually cause a reaction, can attack that food. And when we attack food, food often appears in our digestive tract, so we have collateral damage. It's almost like, excuse me for using such a violent example, but say you wanted to basically take out a tank that was in front of you. You're in a war and you wanted to destroy that tank, and you threw a big bomb on it. Yes, you take out that tank, but the shrapnel might destroy some of the ground. It might hit other tanks around them. It might destroy some trees around that tank or some foliage, and that's exactly what can happen in the gut. So wheat isn't like it used to be, and it's changed, and now we are reacting to something that was never there before. We might even call it Frankenwheat, like Frankenstein. So where are we right now? Well, the current standard of care really looks at the tip of the iceberg, as you're going to see. Celiac disease as a full-blown disease is really an end-stage disease. But as we saw, there's over 10 years possibly of symptoms leading up to that disease. And there's also other symptoms that people can have, which may never manifest into celiac disease, which we might call non-celiac gluten sensitivity, and I'll expand in that in one moment. Now, I'm hoping that the future standard of care looks at the whole iceberg, not just at celiac as a full-blown disease, but as gluten sensitivity as something that anyone and everyone might be susceptible and possibly having. Now, if we look at gluten-related illnesses, including celiac disease, and including this area called non-celiac gluten sensitivity, it's more like a spectrum. It's not like you have it or you don't have it, but you might have anywhere from no known reaction to a level that is celiac disease. And we now know through the work of Dr. Alessio Fasano that most people, if not everyone, actually have or get intestinal damage when they consume gluten. It's just a matter of, are you eating lots of gluten and can't heal quick enough? Or are you eating little bits of gluten and you're able to kind of heal from it and repair the body before the next time you eat it? And that's, of course, going to depend on the individual and on their particular health picture. The point I want to illustrate here is that, one, it's a complete spectrum of gluten-related illnesses. So if you haven't been diagnosed with celiac, gluten sensitivity is still something that wants to be on your radar. In addition, non-celiac gluten sensitivity and celiac have a lot of similar symptoms that overlap with each other. So it's sort of hard sometimes to define the exact symptoms and what condition is a result of those symptoms. So it's sometimes a little bit more abstract than we would like. So now I'd like to get into some of the pillars of healing. Okay, so we're looking at these 4 pillars. We're going to look at diet, we're going to look at therapeutic foods, supplements, and lifestyle. So the first thing whenever I'm working with any client is I want to get the sliver out. And what do I mean by that? Well, this is all about looking for the root cause. What might be causing the problem in the first place? And you know, if you step on a big piece of wood and get a sliver, you can't just put a Band-Aid over that sliver or take, painkillers for the rest of your life. I mean, you could, but it wouldn't be a very effective way of dealing with it. And that's what we do often. We try to kind of mask what's going on. But for ultimate healing, we need to remove that sliver first, and then the healing can begin. So of course, when we're talking about celiac disease and gluten sensitivity, the first sliver that we need to take out is gluten. And gluten needs to be eliminated 100%. And I work with a lot of clients who have gluten sensitivity, and sometimes during the first consult they say, oh yeah, I try to avoid gluten, but I have it or slip up every now and again. Now there's certain things in the diet related to health that it doesn't matter, there is a dose-response relationship, but when it comes to gluten, it's all or nothing. It has to be 100%. Because there's research that shows even a crumb every once in a while can reset the whole inflammatory process and the whole cascade of events that happen to manifest as gluten sensitivity or celiac. So people on a gluten-free diet have to be super vigilant when going to restaurants, when purchasing processed products that have been made, and even in their personal care products. Did you know that there's gluten in some shampoos? So they have to make sure it's out 100%. Now, another area that's often overlooked is this possibility of cross-reactivity. So as you can see in the picture, on the left, you see a gliadin antigen activating the gliadin antibody. In the second picture there, you see casein, which is a milk protein, also activating the gliadin antibody. So there are certain foods that kind of look to our immune system like gluten, but are not gluten. And this is called cross-reactivity. So even after someone has eliminated the gluten, they might have cross-reactivity with other foods. And the reason why I pick on dairy here is because about 50%, that's 50, people that have gluten sensitivity or are celiac also cross-react with dairy. So this is something you probably want to avoid just to cover your bases. And also there are specific tests you can get that look and see which foods you might be cross-reacting with. The other group of foods which tend to be a problem for people are the grain family. Now, we actually didn't begin farming till about 10,000 years ago. Humans got this bright idea that, instead of hunting and gathering and moving around the land, you can actually take seeds of certain plants and plant them and harvest them yourself, and then you don't have to move around as much, and then you can build a shelter and a home, and then you're not always on the move. And that was the beginning of farming about 10,000 years ago. And around this time too, we started to grow, harvest, and consume a lot more of the grain family. Now, this was 10,000 years ago, which seems like a long time, but again, it takes thousands and thousands of years, more than 10,000 years, for our genes to change. We've been on this planet for 2.6 million years. So 10,000 years isn't that long in the grand scheme of things. Some people have a lower tolerance to grains. So they find that even after they've eliminated the gluten and dairy, grains might still be causing an issue in the digestive tract. And then they have to actually eliminate all grains to basically realize complete healing of the digestive tract. So those are three of the main areas I look at in terms of the global diet. And there's a lot of other great foods in what I call the pharmacy with an F. There's this area called therapeutic foods, so specific foods that might have specific healing benefits. And there are a few that I really like to use and have shown to have really great results in my clients. So here's an example of a few. First is bone broth. And I mean, everyone remembers having chicken soup when they were sick when they were young. Chicken soup and just all sorts of bone broths have incredible healing benefits. They've got an abundance of soluble minerals ready to just absorb into the bloodstream from all the vegetables you might have made that broth with. They basically suck all of the protein and collagen and chondroitin and good stuff out of the bones and bring it into the liquid. So what you're left with is a liquid that is super dense with nutrients. And remember, the digestive tract is where we absorb our food. So if it's damaged and we're in the healing process, we want to make sure we have foods, liquids, juices, shakes that are highly absorbable, and liquids tend to be a lot more absorbable than food. So bone broth is one of those super powerful foods that have a lot more nutrition and that make it super easy to absorb. The second item is juicing. And with juicing, we're basically extracting all of the nutrition that's locked up in that fruit or in that vegetable in the fiber matrix. Now, I'm not saying that I want people to juice instead of eating fruits and vegetables. I'm saying that juicing is a great way to supplement the diet with extra nutrition if the digestive tract isn't able to liberate those nutrients from the fruits and vegetables effectively because it might be damaged. So juicing is another great thing to add to the diet. And in fact, there's even specific foods you can juice, like cabbage, that are even more beneficial to the healing of the digestive tract. The third item there are herbal infusions. And this is a great way to pull nutrition out of herbs and spices and things like that. And a couple of my favorites are nettle and oat straw and horsetail, which have nutrients that are really great at building connective tissue. And finally, we have the world of phytonutrients. And there's been thousands of what we call these phytonutrients, phyto meaning plant and nutrient just meaning nutrient. that have been identified. And they communicate with our gene and our cells, and they're really great at bringing down inflammation. And to make it really simple for you to find lots of great phytonutrients, what you want to look for are foods with fruits and vegetables with the colors of the rainbow. So look for reds and purples and greens and yellows and oranges, and you're going to get a whole variety of this wonderful world of phytonutrients. Moving on to supplements. Supplements are fantastic ways of speeding up the healing process because basically they're concentrated parts of food. Food is medicine, and we can even make medicine out of food, and that's where we get this whole world of supplements. So I'm going to talk about each one of these individually: vitamin D, zinc carnosine, L-glutamine, essential fatty acids, and probiotics. Starting with vitamin D. Now, just to give you a few stats to set the stage, more than 50% of the global population is at risk for vitamin D deficiency. A high prevalence of vitamin D deficiency has been found across all age groups in all populations studied in countries around the globe. So yes, vitamin D is the sunshine vitamin, but people in sunshining, cities and states and countries still have to be aware of possible deficiency. And this reminds me of a story of one of my clients who is actually a marathon runner living in California. And, she was outside every day in the sun running for, an hour or so. And she was very low in vitamin D when we had her blood levels checked. I live in Toronto, so pretty much everyone here is low in vitamin D because we're inside most of the year, and even in the summer, we're working inside buildings. So everyone's at risk for vitamin D, and everyone should have their blood levels checked for vitamin D. There's a few references if you want some more information. Now, because I'm doing this talk from Canada, I just want to pick on ourselves for a moment, and Health Canada actually removed vitamin D testing from the standard tests in the medical offices as a free test because people were getting so many tests done. In 2004, there was 29,000 tests that were done across Canada, and in 2009, there were 700,000 tests. So this was costing Health Canada lots of money. And the reason why these tests increased so substantially is because there's so much research coming out on how beneficial vitamin D is. And vitamin is actually more like a hormone rather than a vitamin. It's a prohormone, and it has effects on every single cell in the body. And it's particularly important for the health of the gut. And that's what I'm going to focus on in these coming slides. Vitamin D deficiency may compromise the mucosal barrier. So that's that barrier we were talking about in the small intestine that can get damaged. And we're going to look at this in a bit more detail. So looking at the anatomy of the small intestine a little bit closer. On the left-hand side of this picture, we have the small intestine kind of rolled out. And then if we blow that up, we see that this, shag carpet consistency is made up of many villi. And if we blow the little units that make up that villi, we get what's called the microvilli. And then you can see those are on the pictures on the right there. And now I'm going to blow that up even more. So there you have a microvilli in the middle connected to two microvilli on either side. And what we have connecting these are what are called tight junctions. And these are really important in maintaining the integrity of the small intestine. Now, I'm not sure if you have ever played this game, but there's a game that I played when I was a child called Red Rover. And in fact, I think it's been banned from schools by this point because so many kids would end up getting injured. But the object of the game was to lock your arms as tight as possible. And then when someone would come and run over, you would try to keep them from basically breaking through your arms. Now, our gut is playing a very similar game. It wants those tight junctions to be super tight and super strong, So food substances that we don't really recognize don't slip through between the cells because food should actually be going through the cell. And that's actually one of the things that happens with celiac disease, a condition called leaky gut syndrome, where these tight junctions are compromised. The gluten proteins slip by these cells in between them, undigested properly, and our immune system freaks out because these proteins are bigger than they should be, and our immune system is seeing them as foreign substances, which causes that inflammation response. So this is both a key factor in the disease process, but it's also very important to make sure you have good tight junctions here and here for healing a gut. Now, to look at leaky gut syndrome in a bit more detail, the autoimmune process can be arrested if the interplay between genes and environmental triggers is prevented by reestablishing intestinal barrier function. So yes, we're born with a certain set of genes and they might be susceptible to celiac, but that's not the only part of the story. You actually have to have an environmental trigger, which might be the gluten, and you have to have a leaky gut syndrome. But we can arrest this process if we work on healing the gut, and that's why this is so important. Vitamin D has been shown to markedly enhance tight junctions. So we talked about the tight junctions and leaky gut, but as a double whammy, vitamin D also brings down inflammation. So it's important for putting out that fire that might be going on in the small intestine and in the gut. Another key nutrient is known as zinc carnosine, and it's been used for many years. A lot of great research. And regarding intestinal permeability, zinc carnosine causes an approximate threefold increase in gut integrity and repair. Now we know zinc is really important for tissue healing, and this particular zinc form is particularly effective at healing a gut rapidly. L-glutamine is one of the most important nutrients for the gut. It is the key fuel for our intestinal cells, and as you can see here, the gastrointestinal tract is by far the greatest user of glutamine in the body. This is an amino acid which just fuels the small intestinal cells, and if those cells are going to work hard and replicate, they need a good fuel source. L-glutamine decreases villus atrophy, increases jejunal weight, and decreases intestinal permeability. So a triple whammy for L-glutamine. It decreases the breakdown of those villi that are absorptive cells. It increases jejunal weight, which is just part of our small intestine, and it decreases intestinal permeability, that leaky gut syndrome that we talked about. Essential fatty acids are two fats, omega-3 and omega-6, that we cannot make in our body, so we must get them from the diet. And we find omega-3s in things like fish and walnuts, flax, chia, eggs, and they have more of an anti-inflammatory effect, whereas omega-6s have sort of this Jekyll and Hyde personality. They can be anti-inflammatory or pro-inflammatory. And we find them in things like corn, safflower, red meat, and cottonseed. So if we're really going for an anti-inflammatory effect, I use therapeutically the omega-3s to get a marked decrease in the inflammation in a rapid way. Omega-3s convert into other fats called EPA and DHA, and EPA has more of an anti-inflammatory effect, while DHA is more for structure. Both important in healing a gut. And as you can see here, omega-3s come from things like flax, but they still need to be converted into EPA and then into DHA. And a wonderful source of those fats is fish. And fish have already done all that great work for us. And then we can convert that EPA into one of the most potent anti-inflammatories in our body called PG3. Essential fatty acids, specifically EPA, appears to exert much of its anti-inflammatory benefit by suppressing pro-inflammatory activation. There's also this world of probiotics, which is really important for healing a gut because they are the gatekeepers that line and live all over our gut. I've got a picture of Toronto here because in Toronto, there's a limited amount of real estate. And our gut is very similar. So we want to make sure there's a lot of the good guys, the probiotics, pro-life, lining our gut. Probiotics have an anti-inflammatory effect. Evidence demonstrates the anti-inflammatory and anti-allergic effects of probiotics on a healthy gut. It also helps with the reversal of intestinal permeability. So very important for bringing that gut back to balance. You know, there's a major overuse of antibiotics here in North America. So when people come off antibiotics, it's really important to re-inoculate the gut with probiotics. And in my opinion, every antibiotic prescription should be followed by a probiotic prescription. And finally, it's critical to address the mind-body connection because our gut is actually sometimes called our second brain. It has more nerve endings than the spinal cord. And if we're not in a rest and digest mode, stop and think mode, this is a function of the parasympathetic nervous system. If we're not in that mode, we can't digest food because all of our blood is in our extremities ready to fight or flight. We need that blood to be in our digestive tract working on our internal processes. So we need to be calm, relaxed, and ready to eat our meal in a, controlled environment. So very important to practice what's called mindful eating. Don't want to be listening to bad news or watching the television or having upsetting conversations or be eating in the car or at your desk. You want to stop what you're doing, get in a good mindset, and eat at a table, maybe with some really good company as well, maybe some candles and some good music. But we don't want to be stimulated when we're eating. We want to make sure that we chew our food thoroughly. There's no teeth in our stomach. So we need to make sure that we break down that food to the best that we can in the only chance that we get to break it down mechanically. In the mouth is where we do the mechanical breakdown, but everything else is chemical. So whatever we don't break down mechanically, we have to put more of a load on the body. So chewing our food thoroughly is very important. And one of the rules I give to my clients is they should chew till they have a consistency of peanut butter in their mouth. And in that case, you're going to be able to digest that food a lot better. And finally, stress management. And we all have to do certain stress management activities. Some are destructive and some are constructive. So we want to stick with the constructive ones like yoga, meditation, exercise, deep breathing. All of these are really great for tuning up the nervous system and essentially tuning up the digestive tract to accept food and to move food along in an appropriate and timely manner. So in summary, in a nutshell, so to speak, we want to focus particularly on a gluten-free diet to make sure we don't have that sliver in us, 100% compliant with that. Focus on nutrient-dense foods, so foods that have a therapeutic benefit like the bone broth that we talked about, like the infusions and possibly foods that are high in phytonutrients. We want to focus and possibly implement healing supplements that are concentrated forms of food to speed up the healing process. And we want to make sure that we're in rest and digest mode. Work hard, play hard, and eat calm. So to wrap it up here, the future standard of care where we use the whole iceberg and not just the tip is happening now. And you now have the tools to implement that presented here today. These tools are useless unless you apply them, and as I always say and end my presentations with the term applied knowledge is power. And now you've got some tremendous power within you. If you want to get some more information on gluten, please go to my website, joshkatalis.com, And you can sign up for my newsletter there to be updated, or you can go to joshkatalis.com/gluten sensitivity for a whole bunch of other great resources at your disposal, all about gluten and gluten sensitivity. You may also email me at info@joshkatalis.com if you would like to be added to a mailing list or if you require any more information. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you found this presentation valuable. If you feel it might benefit one of your friends, family, or someone that you know, please forward them this link and share it with them. And remember, the best way to get started is to get started. Thank you so much for joining me.